I try to avoid that, but I think it's unavoidable.
You know, I can't do this forever. I've been doing it since I was 21. As you move into your 80s, you say, hey, that's enough.
Robert Redford's life is without its own share of tragedies. After losing his son at just 4 months, he faced another loss. After these series of tragedies, not to mention financial struggles, something changed forever. Now, at 82, the man who gave us the iconic Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid now lives a life no one expected. From a series of financial challenges to controversies. Here's why one of Hollywood's golden age actors is now its loneliest. Robert Redford's childhood. Robert Redford was born on August 18, 1936, in Santa Monica, California, to Martha Woodruff Redford and Charles Robert Redford Sr., an accountant. His mother was a true Texan from Austin, while his father's side carried a mix of Irish, Scottish, and English blood. His family history is one of grit and adventure. His great-great-grandfather, Elisha Redford, was an English Protestant who fell for Mary Ann McCreary, an Irish Catholic. They married in Manchester, then packed up and set sail for New York in 1849, eventually settling in Stonington, Connecticut. That's where the first Redford named Charles was born, kicking off a family tradition. On his mother's side, the Harts were straight out of Galway, Ireland, while the Greens were Scotch-Irish settlers who made their way to America in the 1700s. Redford grew up in Van Nuys, California, while his father worked in El Segundo. But it was the family trips to Austin that really stuck with him. His visits to Texas weren't just vacations, they were eye-openers. The wild landscapes, the big skies, the pure freedom of it all. It was enough to ignite a deep love for nature. That's where his passion for the environment really began. Redford attended Van Nuys High School, where he shared classrooms with future baseball star Don Drysdale. By his own admission, he wasn't much of a student. School didn't excite him, but the world outside the classroom did. Art and sports were where he found his rhythm. He even helped tennis legend Pancho Gonzalez warm up for matches by hitting balls with him at the Los Angeles Tennis Club. At 11, Redford battled a mild case of polio, but it didn't slow him down for long. After graduating high school in 1954, he headed to the University of Colorado in Boulder. He joined Kappa Sigma fraternity and worked at a local spot called The Sink, where his face is now painted among the bar's murals. But then, college life took a turn. Redford started drinking heavily, lost his half-scholarship, and got kicked out. With school behind him, he took off to Europe, soaking up life in France, Spain, and Italy. Eventually, his artistic side led him to the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, where he studied painting. But his path didn't stop there. New York City was calling, and he answered by enrolling at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. By 1959, he was honing his craft, setting the stage for what would become an iconic career. Redford's career took off in New York City, just like many rising stars of the 1950s. He landed roles on both stage and screen, making his Broadway debut in Tall Story, 1959, followed by The Highest Tree, 1959, and Sunday in New York, 1961. But it was Barefoot in the Park, 1963, that put him on the map, playing a buttoned-up newlywed opposite Elizabeth Ashley in Neil Simon's hit play. Redford proved he had the charm and talent to carry a major production. While making a name for himself on Broadway, he was also a regular face on TV. Starting in 1960, he guest-starred in a string of popular drama series, including Naked City, Maverick, The Untouchables, The Americans, Perry Mason, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Twilight Zone, and Dr. Kildare, among others. His screen presence was undeniable, and Hollywood started paying attention. Redford's film debut came in Tall Story, 1960, where he reprised his Broadway role alongside Anthony Perkins and Jane Fonda in her first movie. As his career gained momentum, he started landing bigger parts. That same year, he played a mentally troubled young man in Rescue 8, an adventure series. and in 1962, he earned an Emmy nomination for The Voice of Charlie Pont. By 1963, he made one of his final television appearances before his big screen career took over, playing a role in the medical drama Breaking Point. From there, he was well on his way to Hollywood stardom. Redford's film career took off fast. In 1962, he landed his second movie role in War Hunt, then starred alongside Alec Guinness in Situation Hopeless, but not serious, playing an American soldier tricked into captivity by a German civilian long after the war had ended. His breakthrough came in Inside Daisy Clover, 1965, where he played a bisexual movie star who marries Natalie Wood's character. The role earned him a Golden Globe for Best New Star. He reunited with Wood and Charles Bronson in This Property is Condemned, 1966, a more successful romantic drama directed by Sidney Pollack. That same year, Redford starred in The Chase with Jane Fonda and Marlon Brando, his first and only time sharing the screen with Brando. His chemistry with Fonda was undeniable, and they teamed up again for the big screen adaptation of Barefoot in the Park, 1967, a major hit. They later reunited for The Electric Horseman, 1979, and nearly 4 decades later, Netflix's Our Souls at Night. Despite his growing popularity, Redford refused to be boxed into the Hollywood golden boy stereotype. He turned down roles in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and The Graduate, looking for something more meaningful. He found it in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969, where he played the sharp-witted outlaw Sundance opposite Paul Newman. The film was a massive success, making him one of Hollywood's most bankable stars and solidifying his image as a smart, charismatic leading man. Although he didn't receive an Oscar or Golden Globe nomination for Butch Cassidy, Redford did win a BAFTA for his work in that film. Downhill Racer, 1969, and Tell Them Willie Boy Is Here, 1969. However, his next few films, Little Fosse and Big Halsey, 1970, and The Hot Rock, 1972, failed to make a splash. By 1972, Redford was also getting involved behind the camera, serving as executive producer for Downhill Racer. That same year, he starred in The Candidate, a sharp political satire that earned critical praise. Then came a streak of box office dominance that few actors have ever matched. From 1973 to 1976, Redford was Hollywood's top-grossing star. His run included Jeremiah Johnson, 1972, The Way We Were, 1973, with Barbra Streisand, and The Sting, 1973, a blockbuster reunion with Paul Newman that became the highest-grossing film of 1974. The Sting also earned Redford his only Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Behind the Scenes of The Way We Were. For a film that's now considered one of the greatest love stories in cinema, The Way We Were had its fair share of behind-the-scenes tension, starting with Robert Redford's outright reluctance to even take the role. While the on-screen chemistry between Redford's dashing Hubble Gardner and Barbra Streisand's fiery Katie Morosky is undeniable, the reality behind the camera was far less romantic. Initially, Redford wasn't sold on the role of Hubble. In fact, he turned it down, repeatedly. Why? Because, to put it bluntly, he thought the character was hollow. Redford saw Hubble as nothing more than a weak, spineless sex object, a golden boy with no real substance, a trophy for Streisand's politically passionate Katie to fawn over. He wasn't interested in playing eye candy, and he made that very clear. The production team had to practically beg him to reconsider, sweetening the deal and assuring him that the script could be tweaked to give Hubble more depth. Even after Redford finally agreed, the tension didn't stop there. Streisand was deeply invested in the film. She had been attached to the project long before Redford was even considered, and she had strong ideas about how it should be executed. Redford, on the other hand, wasn't one to be steamrolled. While their characters may have been doomed by political differences off-screen, it was more about creative clashes, Redford was cool, calculated, and hesitant to get too emotionally invested, while Streisand was all heart, throwing herself into every moment of filming. And while audiences love to romanticize the idea that their on-screen passion might have bled into real life, that simply wasn't the case. Unlike some of Hollywood's most famous co-star feuds, think Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes' alleged prank war, or the rocky relationship between Dirty Dancing's Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze, Streisand and Redford didn't dislike each other, but they also weren't exactly besties. Streisand reportedly admired Redford, and let's be real, who didn't in the 70s? But Redford remained somewhat distant. He was professional and polite, but never overly warm, leading some to speculate that he kept a firm boundary to avoid any real-life entanglements. According to Robert Hoffler's book, The Way They Were, How Epic Battles and Bruised Egos Brought a Classic Hollywood Love Story to the Screen, Redford initially wanted nothing to do with the film. He turned down the role of Hubble Gardner for a staggering 8 months, convinced that the project was just a Barbra Streisand showcase that would leave him as little more than a human prop. He famously dismissed the script as a piece of junk and described his character as a Ken doll, a pretty boy with no real depth. It wasn't until the studio sweetened the deal, raising his salary to $1.2 million, ironically, more than Streisand's $1 million paycheck, that he finally agreed to sign on. But money didn't smooth out the tension. Redford and Streisand often clashed on set, their creative differences mirroring the conflicts between their characters. The production itself was a mess. 11 different screenwriters were brought in to try to salvage the script, with the studio constantly fretting over its politically charged themes. Streisand, deeply invested in the film, was notorious for her perfectionism. Costume designer Dorothy Jenkins, who designed a staggering 56 outfits for Streisand, quit entirely after becoming fed up with her endless revisions and demands. And then there was the love scene. Despite the passion that oozed from the screen, the truth was far from romantic. Redford, ever the professional, and perhaps a bit wary, reportedly wore 2 athletic supporters while filming the intimate scene with Streisand, supposedly to protect himself in more ways than one. Meanwhile, Streisand opted for a bikini, ensuring that their on-screen passion remained strictly PG. The film's producer, Ray Stark, was determined to keep the film accessible to the widest audience possible, even removing an F-bomb from the script to dodge an R rating. Redford, a devoted husband and father at the time, was famously private and reluctant to feed into Hollywood's romantic fantasies. While Streisand openly adored Redford, the feeling wasn't exactly mutual. He respected her talent but kept his distance, unwilling to indulge in any off-screen entanglements. Despite all their differences, there was one thing both stars did agree on. They had a good side, and they wanted the camera to capture it. Both Redford and Streisand insisted on having the left side of their faces featured as much as possible. Cinematographer Harry Stradling Jr. went so far as to block out natural light in certain shots to avoid emphasizing Streisand's nose. Redford, meanwhile, didn't want the 3 moles on the right side of his face to be too visible. Though The Way We Were became a massive success, any hopes for a sequel were dashed by Redford himself. While Streisand was open to the idea, Redford refused. He had no interest in revisiting the story or working with Streisand again. For all the lightning bolt chemistry the pair had in their first read-through, the truth is, their off-screen dynamic was anything but romantic. Redford never believed Streisand was a serious actress and feared she would try to direct herself throughout the film. He also really didn't want her to sing, though in the end she delivered one of the most iconic theme songs in cinema history. The final product may be a timeless love story, but behind the scenes, The Way We Were was less about romance and more about an actor trying to escape a movie he never wanted to make in the first place. Yet, despite the chaos, the friction, and the behind-the-scenes battles, The Way We Were became one of the most beloved romances of all time. Maybe it's proof that you don't need real-life chemistry to create magic on screen. Just a little creative conflict, a lot of reworked scripts, and, in Redford's case, some extra protection. Despite all the drama, The Way We Were went on to become a cultural phenomenon. Its bittersweet ending continues to break hearts, and its themes of love, loss, and irreconcilable differences remain just as relevant today. But while audiences wept for Katie and Hubbell's doomed romance, Redford was probably just relieved that he made it through without becoming the leading man he never wanted to be. The many tragedies that plagued Robert Redford. Robert Redford may have built a legendary career playing charismatic outlaws, slick con men, and even a ruthless agency head in Captain America. The Winter Soldier, but behind his rugged charm and effortless cool, his real-life story was marked by heartbreak, tragedy, and near-death experiences. The Hollywood tough guy persona masked a life filled with struggles, loss, and a battle with a terrifying illness that could have ended everything before it even began. Before Redford ever set foot in front of a camera, he faced one of the most frightening illnesses of the 20th century: polio. At just 11 years old, Redford was suddenly struck down with the disease, his body betraying him after what should have been an innocent, carefree day at the ocean. He had unknowingly overexerted himself while swimming, and when he emerged from the water, something felt off. The effects came fast and hit hard. Weakness, fatigue, and an eerie, creeping numbness took over. The doctors confirmed what every parent in the 1940s and 50s feared. He had polio. Though considered a mild case, it was severe enough to keep him bedridden for 2 agonizing weeks. 2 weeks of isolation. 2 weeks of uncertainty. 2 weeks of wondering whether he'd wake up one morning unable to move. The polio vaccine hadn't yet been widely introduced, and even a so-called mild case could leave lifelong damage. The fear of paralysis loomed over him. The young boy who once spent his days running wild through the streets of Santa Monica, dreaming of adventure, was now confined to a bed, wondering if he'd ever move the same way again. Years later, Redford recalled the experience with a calm detachment, telling NPR's Fresh Air in 2018, "It was a case of mild polio, but it was severe enough to put me in bed for 2 weeks. It was alarming, but it wasn't serious enough to go much further." This frightening chapter in his childhood was just the beginning of the hardships that would shape Robert Redford into the enigmatic Hollywood icon the world would come to know. Years later, after surviving his own bout with the disease, Redford honored the man who changed the world. Jonas Salk, the scientist who developed the polio vaccine in the 1950s. As part of a 2014 short film series, Cathedrals of Culture, Redford stepped behind the camera to direct a segment about the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in San Diego. He reflected on the profound impact of the vaccine, saying, via Express, "I was around when the polio epidemic was still a threat. So when Jonas Salk invented the vaccine, it was just earth-shattering news." But long before Redford became a Hollywood legend, he had a rebellious streak that nearly cost him everything. Who would have guessed that Robert Redford, the suave leading man, the political activist, the Academy Award-winning director, was once a teenage delinquent? Growing up in Van Nuys, California, he spent much of his high school years running with a street gang, getting into trouble, and flirting with danger. Daring stunts were part of their daily routine, and Redford, eager to prove himself, once took on a challenge that could have ended in disaster. The gang dared him to jump off a dangerously high building. If he refused, he'd be branded a coward. Without hesitation, he took the leap, defying both gravity and common sense. Miraculously, he survived without breaking a single bone. But the rush of adrenaline and the thrill of defying fear stayed with him. In his 2011 memoir, Robert Redford, The Biography, He reflected on the life-altering impact of those moments. Facing down fears hit home early. You have two choices, it seemed to me. You can be led by your fears, or you can overcome them. With his reputation secured, Redford continued wreaking havoc with his gang, indulging in petty theft and illegal activities. Their favorite pastime? Stealing alcohol from nearby stores. But the party came to an abrupt halt when, at 16 years old, Redford was arrested for possession of stolen jewelry. For a moment, it seemed like his path was set for a darker future. But fate had other plans. The charges were eventually dropped. And while the rebellious streak never fully left him, it was this brush with the law that signaled a turning point. The boy who once leaped off rooftops and outran the police would soon channel his fearlessness into something far greater, an iconic Hollywood career. While Redford was fortunate enough to survive his childhood battle with polio, the same cannot be said for some of his closest family members, whose tragic deaths left lasting scars on him. The first major loss in Redford's life came when he was just 18 years old. In 1955, his mother, Martha Redford, passed away at the young age of 40 due to a hemorrhage. The cause of her death was linked to a blood disorder she had developed after suffering a stillbirth of twin daughters 8 years earlier. A tragedy that had already deeply affected the family. More than 6 decades later, at the 2018 Sundance Film Festival's Utah Women's Leadership Celebration, Redford gave an emotional tribute to his mother that left the audience in tears. Reflecting on their relationship, he admitted that he had been a rebellious teenager who often caused her stress, but despite everything, she never lost faith in him. She believed that all things considered, she just had faith that I had something in me that was going to turn out okay, he recalled, via Closer Weekly. Tragically, Martha never lived to see her son's meteoric rise to fame. Just 5 years after her passing, Redford would make his screen debut, launching a career that would cement him as one of Hollywood's most beloved leading men. Speaking to the star-studded audience, which included longtime friend and collaborator Jane Fonda, Redford praised his mother's infectious smile, adventurous spirit, and unwavering optimism. But as much as he celebrated her memory, he also expressed a deep and painful regret. I took her for granted, because that's the way kids were at that age. My regret is that she passed away before I could thank her. The weight of that regret followed Redford throughout his life, a reminder that even the brightest stars carry shadows of sorrow behind their fame. Robert Redford's childhood was marked by absence. His father, Charles Redford, worked grueling hours as a milkman, leaving little time for father-son bonding. But in his father's place, Redford found a mentor and role model in his Uncle David, a skilled football player and a multilingual intellect. David was everything young Robert looked up to. The two would often practice football together, perfecting their throws. However, that bond was painfully cut short. When World War II erupted, David enlisted in the army, leaving behind the young boy who idolized him. In 1945, tragedy struck. While traveling across a Luxembourg bridge in a Jeep, David was caught in crossfire and lost his life. He never made it back home. The grief of losing his uncle was compounded by the way his family processed tragedy, by not processing it at all. In a 2013 interview with NPR, Redford reflected on how his household handled loss. The way the family dealt with it, it just wasn't talked about. It just happened, and you didn't ask a lot of questions. It was what it was. I think that was sort of built into the family structure. There was no talk about it, and everybody moved on. Throughout his career, Redford has often channeled his personal pain into his performances. His deep connection to sports in films like Downhill Racer and The Natural wasn't just about the roles, it was about reliving his own history of using physical activity as an escape. In a candid 1990 interview with the Los Angeles Times, the Hollywood icon admitted that sports became an emotional outlet for his bottled-up rage and disappointment. For me, it was anger, and finding a place to put my disappointment and frustration with a lot of things. I was a mess. I was somewhat in trouble socially. I lost my baseball scholarship pretty quickly after I discovered drinking. When I left college and got into art, that got me out. Finding my place in the world had a lot to do with acting. For Redford, sports, art, and eventually acting became his salvation. But the loss of his uncle, a man who had been his guiding light, remained a wound he carried through the years, shaping the resilient yet deeply introspective man he would become. Redford has long drawn upon his personal trials to inform his work, a skill that became especially evident in his 1980 directorial debut, Ordinary People. The Oscar-winning drama, which explores a wealthy family's emotional repression and trauma, reflected Redford's own upbringing. By the late 1950s, Redford's life seemed to be on the rise. He had just married Lola Van Wagenen, landed his first Broadway role in Tall Story, and welcomed his first child, Scott. But in November 1959, tragedy struck. Just 10 weeks after his birth, Scott passed away from what would later be recognized as sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. The loss devastated Redford, who blamed himself for not checking on his baby sooner. In an interview with The Mirror, he admitted, "It was really hard. We were very young. I had my first theater job, which didn't pay much. We didn't know anything about sudden infant death syndrome, so as a parent, you blame yourself. It creates a scar that never completely heals." Just 3 years later, in 1962, Redford and Lola faced yet another terrifying ordeal. Their second son, David James Redford, was born prematurely with hyaline membrane disease, the same respiratory condition that claimed the life of John F. Kennedy's infant son, Patrick. Doctors gave David just a 40% chance of survival, leaving the couple in a state of uncertainty. Against the odds, both mother and child survived. Reflecting on that moment, Redford described it as a colossal relief for us. Despite his public success, Redford's family endured many private struggles. In a 1998 People interview, he expressed frustration over the misconception that his life had been easy. "People think it's been easy for me. That's hard to live with. It's so untrue. The hardest thing in the world is when your children have problems. There have been so many hits on our family that no one knows about, and I don't want them to. For my family's sake." More tragedy. In 1983, another devastating event rocked the Redford family, this time involving his daughter, Shauna. Her boyfriend, journalism student Sid Wells, was found fatally shot in the back of his head at his University of Colorado apartment. The case remains one of the family's most painful, unresolved tragedies. The primary suspect, Wells's roommate Thane Smika, was reportedly supposed to pay rent that day. Although police arrested Smika, the lack of concrete evidence meant he was never indicted. Smika vanished soon after, with his abandoned car discovered in Beverly Hills in 1986. Authorities suspect he may have fled the country. In 2010, the case saw new developments when enough fresh evidence emerged for a review. The Boulder County District Attorney's Office approved an arrest affidavit, and investigators even released age-progressed mugshots in hopes of tracking Smika down. Yet, despite their efforts, he remains at large. Reflecting on the painful ordeal in 1997, Redford told the Minnesota Star-Tribune, "It's like a partially open door with a very dark room behind it." Robert Redford's career took a significant leap forward, thanks in part to Natalie Wood. The two first met in high school, and Wood, already an established star, reportedly recommended Redford for his breakout role in Inside Daisy Clover, 1965. They reunited a year later in This Property is Condemned, cementing their close friendship. However, in 1981, Wood tragically drowned near Catalina Island while on a boating trip with her husband, Robert Wagner, and actor Christopher Walken. The circumstances surrounding her death remain unclear, fueling decades of speculation. Redford, known for his privacy, did not shy away from honoring Wood's legacy. He narrated a heartfelt tribute for Turner Classic Movies and participated in the 2020 HBO documentary What Remains Behind, which explored her life and career. The marriage split. By the mid-1980s, Robert Redford and Lola Van Wagenen were seen as one of Hollywood's most enduring couples. They had married in 1958, weathered the tragic loss of their firstborn, Scott, and raised 3 other children, Shauna, James, and Amy. So, it came as a surprise when the couple announced their separation in 1985, nearly a decade after it had already happened. Reflecting on the split in 2001, Redford told The Telegraph that the breakup was mutual and it was the right thing to do. Redford even went on to admit that they still had great love, affection, and great friendship. Redford eventually found love again with German artist Sibylle Sagers, whom he married in 2009. The two had already been living together at Redford's Sundance home since the mid-1990s. The pain of losing a child once is unimaginable, but in 2020, Redford and his ex-wife, Lola Van Wagenen, faced yet another heartbreaking tragedy. Their son James Redford passed away at age 58 from liver cancer. James had battled liver disease for much of his life, undergoing a transplant in 1993. He later dedicated himself to raising awareness about organ donation, founding an institute to educate others on the importance of the procedure. However, while awaiting another transplant in 2019, he was diagnosed with bile duct cancer. His wife, Kyle, announced his passing in October 2020, writing on social media, "We're heartbroken. He lived a beautiful, impactful life and was loved by many." In a statement to People magazine, Redford's publicist, Cindy Berger, shared, "The grief is immeasurable with the loss of a child. Jamie was a loving son, husband, and father. His legacy lives on through his children, art, filmmaking, and devoted passion for conservation and the environment." Which Robert Redford movie did you enjoy growing up? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more interesting content.